came on and said you did not follow procedure. Is there any law, really, that governs an academia or as yourself to really follow any certain type of procedure in entering a country?
You see, when you have statements being made by senior government officials, which statements are uncoordinated and contradictory, it means that truth is being sacrificed. I've visited Zambia on numerous occasions. I did not need any procedure to be followed. What I required was my passport and a return air ticket. And when I entered the airport, I was welcomed by Zambian officials, and I delivered my lecture and came back home. What procedure was I required to follow? Those who invited me from the Eden University invited me to preside over a function which was a graduation, and the evening before to deliver a lecture. To say that I did not follow procedure is as amusing as it is preposterous.
Prof, your take, or your, in simple words and very few words.
Yes.
Just how you perceive the Zambian government after the occurrence.
I still think, really I have nothing negative to say. I believe that every government has its reason. I believe that what they did is inexcusable, particularly at this time when we are talking about Africa Agenda 2063. And Africa Agenda 2063 is meant to create an environment where Africans enjoy free movement across the continent. And if this continent is to grow on the basis of ideas and on the basis of scrutiny of ideas and interaction of peoples, to deny an African entry into Zambia is the most unfortunate thing that any government can do, because it creates a mountain out of a molehill. Had I been allowed into Zambia, I would have delivered my lecture perhaps without the glare of publicity. What has happened now is that something that was purely innocuous, it is receiving a disproportionate amount of publicity. And I believe that the government, with the help of hindsight, must know that what they did was without basis, without wisdom, and without reason. And I believe that they will, in future, treat me and others differently. I'm now wondering to myself, if I wanted to have a holiday at the Mosi-Otunya Falls, will I be denied entry at Livingstone? This is the question that is lingering in my mind. I hope that the government of Zambia will not allow me to visit the Mosi-Otunya Falls.
What's your talk on China and Africa relations so far?
You know, and this was going to be my thesis during the presentation, that Africa has been victimized in many ways. Africans were enslaved. I would have commenced my testimony. And it suffered the vagaries of slavery. Africa was colonized. And after colonization, the specter of neo-colonization came about. And there is a sense in which the founding fathers of Africa, and I would have mentioned Kwame Nkrumah, I would have mentioned Julius Kambarage Nyerere, I would have mentioned Kenneth David Kaunda, were clear in their minds that the entire struggle for independence was to liberate ourselves and to liberate our minds, to decolonize our minds. And therefore I would have said that in this day and age, when China as an emerging power has exaggerated appetite for resources, when we engage with her, we must define what we want, because the Chinese, to their credit, have already defined what they want. They have appetite for our minerals. They have appetite for our land. They have appetite for opportunities which would otherwise go to young Africans. And that therefore when we engage with them, we must ask ourselves, are we engaging for our benefit? The thing that we call trade, is it trade? Is Zambia capable of negotiating with China? I would have said that going forward, Africa can only negotiate with China on the basis of regional blocks. And this is not something that is new. I've said it not once, not twice, times without number, that Africa must negotiate regionally as SADC, as East African Community, as ECOWAS, as the Maghreb, as Central Africa. And that therefore, when we do so, we are able to negotiate for the benefit of our people. And if we don't do so, China may end up being our new colonizer. And the modern colonization is not about administration. You can have black faces or African faces in the political arena, but they are merely being manipulated. We don't want China to be the puppeteer and we the puppets. And many African countries must, in the nature of things, begin to interrogate the place of China in the economic and political arena. In a nutshell, that is the kind of approach that I intended to take, and of course, we would have engaged with the audience, and the audience would have teased out in a manner that is Zambia specific. In Zambia, for example, we know that we now have Chinese hookers. Why should Chinese hook? Why should Chinese be running pubs? There are areas which must be ring-fenced for the Zambians. And there are areas where we can engage with China in a meaningful way so that there is transfer of technology, so that we retain our dignity and sovereignty and we don't sacrifice it at the altar of short-term political gains.
So in a nutshell, what you're saying is that Africa does need China in a way, but then in a more normal or educative approach?
Let me say this, that the whole world is, in the nature of things, a global village, and that trade is the lifeblood of human interaction. China needs Africa, Africa needs China, but there is a way in which we need each other. There is a way in which you need each other in the manner that a horse rider needs a horse to ride it. For the time being, I hold the view that the horse rider is China. Africa is the horse to do China's bidding. My prescription is that we should enjoy a symbiotic relationship, a mutually beneficial relationship, and that can only be achieved if we define our agenda and our goals. In my view, there is no evidence to suggest to me that we have clearly defined what we want, and that is why we are allowing the Chinese to enter into areas which we could ourselves be engaged in. That is why we are allowing Chinese labor to come into the African continent in areas which could be preserved for young Africans. That is my quarrel. That is my concern. Am I right? I may not be right, but these ideas ought to be on the table of discussion for purpose of scrutiny, so that if my ideas are without merit, they will be demonstrated to be without merit by force of reason, not by reason of force. And to deny one an opportunity to put those ideas on the table of negotiation or discussion is intolerance at its most absurd. And I'm trying to look for a polite word to say a bad thing, which is not always easy. It is absurd, and absurd at its most absolute.
Prof, at the path of people moving as Africa and China relations, where are we headed to?
You know, my fear is, without the benefit and the gift of prophecy, is that if we are not very careful, our resources will be exploited to our detriment. And one can see the evidence of this in many areas. If you go to countries such as the Democratic Republic of Congo, if you go to countries such as Central Africa, and indeed in many other countries in Africa, you see the presence of China. And my fear is that their appetite for resources is almost insatiable, which is understandable because of the population that they have to take care of, 1 billion plus. If we continue on this trajectory, in the next 50 years, the promises that we have made to ourselves under Africa Agenda 2063 will not be realized. The promises that the world has made jointly for humanity under Sustainable Development Goals will not be realized. And you can see that the rise of China is not restricted only to the economic arena. They are also, in the fullness of time, going to afflict us with their political bacteria. And that bacteria may very well inform how we conduct our politics. My view is engage with China at the level of the economy, but define your interests. Engage with China politically, but let us define for ourselves what democracy means to us. Engage with China in the arena of security, but not in a manner that undermines our sovereignty. So that in real terms, the problem is largely with us. The problem is largely with our political leaders, who are not thinking of the next generation, but are ever thinking about the next election. The Chinese are thinking for the next generation. They are asking themselves, in 100 years' time, how will we relate with the world and with Africa? Because if you look at the world quite keenly, there is a sense in which there is a new scramble for Africa. There is a new scramble for African resources. And China is at the forefront of it. China is prepared. They are moving with the delicacy of a sleepwalker, and we are sleeping ourselves, and they will devour us. Because Charles Darwin is still right. It is survival of the fittest and the dying of the least suitable. We can only survive if we are smart, and the sooner we recognize it, the safer we are. It is only in that way that we'll stop our young men and women from dying across the Mediterranean Sea. It is only then that we'll stop our young men and women from committing suicide. We must begin to create an environment where our young men and women innovate and invent and realize their potential. We can do it. We have the wherewithal. It is the political leadership that we need to guide us in that direction. And this is the message that we keep on articulating and will continue to articulate.
And do you think that this era of political leaders that we have really have the strength or the energy to talk to China in that way and bring that subject forward?
Unfortunately, when I look across Africa, I don't see the evidence. There are few of them who can be isolated and have distinguished themselves in that regard, but they are too few. They are too few. If we are talking about 54 heads of states and government and you have no more than 5 who are clear about how to engage with China, it tells you that they are in the minority, and their survival rate and their chance of survival is like the chance of a snowball in hell. And it is therefore incumbent upon us as the population to rise up, to speak to leadership with the firmness that will open their eyes, not with the arrogance that will inflame their anger. And that is what some of us are doing. We are simply telling the leaders that you have been given the opportunity, the honor and privilege of being in the forefront of articulating our agenda. Remember that you are trustee for our interests and do that which is in our best interest. Don't look to the next election. The next election cycle in many African countries is just about 5 years. You think about the next generation. And when you do so, you will be serving Africa, and you will be fulfilling the dreams of our founding fathers and the expectations of the people of Africa. These are times that call for men and women who are prepared to move regardless.
I'm very tempted, Prof, to take you back to Zambia.
Please do.
Of course. Really, the way our president, Edgar Lungu, has been running affairs with China, very secretive, I should say. We're not sure of how much money is coming into from China, what grants are being given, what loans are being given. Just your word of advice in that way.
My own view is that the government of President Lungu must do that which is in the best interest of Zambia. The evidence that is there suggests to me and others that this is a relationship that is one of unequals, and that while we may have visible things in the terms of roads that are being constructed, in the terms of dams that are being constructed, in the terms of physical infrastructure, the question that we must ask, in the long term, are these going to solve the problems of Zambia and the people of Zambia? The world now recognizes that the true test of a country's state is not the gross domestic product, the GDP. It is not the per capita income. That is voodoo economics. The world now asks the critical question, what is the gross national happiness of the people of Zambia? Are young people graduating from the universities having opportunity to serve if they want to be employed? And if they don't want to be employed, do they have the opportunity to innovate? And if they are not innovating, do they have the opportunity to invent? And the Zambians are asking, as other Africans, is the copper that is being mined, are we getting the right dividends from the copper if our resources are being exploited? And the evidence that is available is suggesting to us, without the benefit of the detail, that there is something that is happening that will not be good in the long term. And that is why we are warning leadership that even as you go, whatever your intentions are, remember that countries have found themselves in this situation. Don't step on the same landmines. Listen to us. We are speaking to you not because we want to remove you from power. We don't bear any arms. What we have are ideas. Receive them. Distill the ones that are workable and use them. It is you who will have the glory. That is what we are telling the administration of President Lungu. And we hope that in his wisdom, like the ocean before him, he'll receive all rivers, because it is in receiving new ideas that you renew your own. That is all we ask.
Prof, Africa is highly indebted. And of course, Zambia, to be precise, this caused most civil society organizations actually protest during the budget presentation last Friday. And most fear that we are getting into a crisis. And the only solution that looks to be very promising is that of China, rather than the IMF. So now the government of Zambia is trying to drive away from the IMF and get itself entangled more into China. Just your word on that. Is that a
You know, this idea, this misguided belief by many African countries that you can beg yourself out of poverty, that you can tax yourself out of poverty, is classical voodoo economics. History has demonstrated times without number that countries must harness their resources through value addition and through trade that is properly guided. It is only in that way that you are capable of lifting yourself from the quicksand of poverty to the hard rock of true prosperity. And we have had countries demonstrate this. During our own lifetime, we have seen countries such as little Singapore, which is but a city-state, lift herself, not because she borrowed herself out of poverty or begged herself out of poverty, but because she innovated, because she engaged in meaningful trade and used the resource that she had for her benefit. We have seen North Korea do that. We have seen a post-war Vietnam do that. We have seen in the recent past, even in the continent of Africa, little countries such as Botswana do that. We have seen Rwanda do that. And I believe that Zambia has the wherewithal to achieve that, to argue that our salvation must come from the east or from the west, is to misguide ourselves and to undermine our ability as a people. Kwame Nkrumah had the foresight as early as 1957 to say we should neither look east nor west, we should look forward. He was saying in effect is that we ought not to place our fate on interactions with other civilizations. He recognized that Africa had the resources and that if we harnessed them and engaged in trade, we could lift ourselves up. So this idea that it is either China or the IMF or we are doomed is misguided. We can, in the context of SADC, for example, if you permit me to talk about Zambia, if we improved intra-African trade to about 60%, I can tell you that we are capable of surviving in many ways. So I don't agree that it is either China or the IMF or we are doomed.
Pan-Africanism and democracy, do you see this prevailing in West African countries?
You know, let's first of all ask ourselves what was the thesis of the Pan-African agenda? Because the pioneers such as Kwame Nkrumah, such as Mwalimu Nyerere, Modibo Keita, Kenneth David Kaunda had the idea that for Africa to realize her potential and for Africa to protect herself from other world powers, it was wise for her to unite. And that was the clarion call of Kwame Nkrumah in May 1963 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, when he said, let us not live here without uniting. Let us not live here without a single currency. Let us not live here without a single army. Let us not live here without a united government, because, he said, the neo-colonizer is going to come back to us and they are going to divide us and they are going to remind us that our safety lies in our sovereignty. The Pan-Africans of today ought to draw from that and to recognize that one of the things that is going to help Africa is for Africa to unite. And one is not being naive by saying that we should pronounce now that there is a state called the United States of Africa. We are not saying that. We are saying that Africa can use the building blocks of the regions, starting with the SADC, the ECOWAS, the East African Community, Central Africa, the Maghreb, and progressively, if we begin to move closer and closer in the economic arena, we allow people to move freely, we remove tariff and non-tariff barriers, and we begin to think one, we begin to negotiate with Europe and America and China as united blocs, then in the fullness of time, the economic arrangement will give birth to political unity. And in that way, Africa will now sit at the dinner table of human civilization as a diner, not as a waiter or food to be consumed. We are saying that that should be the agenda for Pan-Africanism. And this thing called democracy, we must also redefine it. Africa has been made to believe that democracy equals to multi-party politics, democracy equals to periodic election. I'm beginning to think that we ought to ask ourselves, is it possible to allow people participation in governance without borrowing lock, stock, and barrel the ideas that were conceived and birthed in other parts of the world, so that we give what one may describe as an African flavor to democracy? This is a debate that we ought to put on the table, because we have seen in the recent past in many African countries, after election, there is conflict. We don't want this to happen, that if there is an election, we know as sure as day follows night that there will be conflict and there will be disharmony in the country. Is there a better governance method that answers to the prescriptions and dictates of democracy which can be practiced in Africa? It is a debate that ought to be articulated at different fora in Africa going forward.
Prof, as we conclude, of course, what you experienced in Zambia is a clear demonstration that we have an infringement of the freedom of speech, and people do not have the right to speak freely on matters that really affect them. Just your way of the leadership when it comes to, of course, allowing people to just come out freely and speak about such topics.
History has demonstrated that ideas can be very threatening, particularly if those ideas are ideas that threaten people's positions. But history has also demonstrated that it is ideas that change societies. And my appeal to all leaders across the continent and across the political divide is that democracy is a marketplace of ideas. Ideas must be placed on the table of debate for their cross-fertilization and cross-pollination. It is only in that way that we are then able to distill from that process the ideas that will propel our education, propel our health, propel our economies, propel our politics, and to create an environment where ideas are denied the oxygen that will make them survive is in itself backward, unnecessary, and potentially destructive. My view is allow ideas to grow. As the wise have said, the ocean is great because it accepts all rivers. Nations will be great if they accept all ideas. They jettison the ones that are impracticable and use the ones that are practicable. And that is my message to my friends in leadership in the great country of Zambia, the country of Kenneth David Kaunda and Levi Patrick Mwanawasa.
Any final remarks that you'd love to make? I'd love to get you to talk as well.
I've said my piece, but in this quest for African unity, those who think that it's going to be a walk in the park are misguided. There are going to be difficult moments. There are going to be painful moments. But the wisdom of the ages is that there is no gain without pain. So some of us who have now started tasting the pain of rejection at countries' borders are beginning to experience firsthand what our forebears did. Samora Machel was right. A luta continua.
This is what you get. For the in-laws, enough is